John, some drafts are good. Some drafts, not so good. The top five
You
picks
know,
from the 1989 draft to the top, the 2017 draft, for which almost half of the first round just had its option declined for the fifth year at the bottom.
you don't see the parallels between the two. We got quarterback, we got a pass rusher, we got a running back, we got a skill guy.
Good point. Good point. So you think this will be 4 out of 5 Hall of Famers in 2017's first round?
I think it's more likely to be 4 out of 5 guys not in the league past like year 7. You know, it's just a first round, and we look through it. You know, give or take, it's right around 12 to 14 on a given draft over the last 5 years. You know, this is on the high end of 44% of the 2017 now has officially not had their fifth year options declined. The difference is that in like the 14 draft, the 15 draft, there were a lot of guys in the teens and definitely the 20s.
Yeah.
This draft had 5 of the 14 players were in the top 9.
John Ross
In
being
the top
other.
9. John Ross being the other. So you have that's too many. Like that's a disaster.
Take a look at this thing. And we'll get into this from a Niners standpoint, but before we do that, Jamal Adams at 6, Christian McCaffrey at 8, Mahomes, Watson, okay, those are TJ Watt, I'd say, is probably the other headliner.
I'd also say that so of the top 12 picks, you had 5 guys get declined right in the top 12. Well, 3 of them look like Hall of Famers. I mean, the one quarterback for sure Mahomes does. McCaffrey is clearly on a Hall of Fame trajectory. And Watson just has a good like his momentum. I mean, he has a long way to go, but you would say his arrow's pointed in the right direction, right?
Yep.
I mean, he's got a chance to just be a star in the league for a long time. And if you're just going to the playoffs every year, who's to say? If I told you right now Deshaun Watson becomes a Super Bowl champion, you wouldn't look at me crazy.
No. And if you told me that Myles Garrett, now that he's allowed back in the league,
yeah, I'd say it's going to be an upset. Mahomes is like a year away from just getting that, like Kurt Warner, Terrell Davis, like he's just in. You know, his just 4 years were too great. Deshaun is just going to be on a trajectory of having one of the great football careers ever, right? What he did in college, then what he's doing in the pros. I like guys like that. Where I think Mahomes, sometimes you get a guy that was questionable in college, becomes a star, or vice versa. It happens. Star in college, Leonard Fournette. We've been hearing about Leonard Fournette since high school. And really, he's a weird one, right? Like, he's not terrible. He had a really productive year last year. I think it's more on character and attitude than it is just he's an NFL starting running back.
Right. Maybe there's some other teams where his option does get picked up. It's weird. And there were some weird ones as we look back, right? Like Kyle Fuller, who didn't get picked up but got extended by his team, or Brandon Cooks, who got traded but still got the fifth-year option picked up. We just went strictly with guys who did not have their option picked up. And this draft had 14 of them, and like you said, a lot of them in the top 10, top 12. Now, this video is about specifically the 49ers draft because it's not just about the first round. How they overcame some of the failures of this first round and to put themselves in a position that they have now as an organization is part of this. But before we get into their part of it, let's just remind you that A, we appreciate you being here. B, if you subscribe to the channel, that's great. C, really should be A, which is like this video. That's great too.
Sky, I'm John. We also have a podcast below in the description. Subscribe to that as well. We got football takes, we got opinions, and we produce some content.
All right, here's the Niners draft. The first rounders, we saw those two, Thomas and Reuben Foster, of course. I mean, it's hard to define this draft by that because of what they did in the fifth round with George Kittle. They got Trent Taylor, who still has a chance to contribute. DJ Jones in the sixth round, Middlecoff, he started every game before he got hurt last year. He started 11 games, had a high ankle sprain. I mean, he's more than a contributor. Like, he is a...
Yeah. It's a great sixth-round pick.
Contributor plus. A great... And even Adrian Colbert contributed for a couple years, started a handful of games before moving on.
And he's still in the league.
Yeah.
To me, it's pretty black and white. You brought up a couple outliers. If you don't pick up the fifth-year option on your first-round pick, it's a whiff. Now, Brandon Cooks, the Saints, you'd go, well, they traded him for a first-round pick. That's not a whiff. The Bears with Fuller declined it. He has a big fourth year. They extend him. He's still one of their best defensive players. That's not
Yeah.
a whiff. But I say 99% of declines, you screwed up. When you draft a guy in the first round, you want the guy to be a core piece of your franchise. And when you draft him really high, this is where I think the 89 draft is a good example. If I'm drafting in the top 5 of the draft, where if you look at the 2017 draft, when you put up the whole thing, you see there were some really impactful players. Jamal Adams, not far away. Christian McCaffrey is a star. And for the Niners at the time, what did they need? A quarterback. And Kyle Shanahan has admitted since that they didn't focus that much on because they had their eyes on Kirk Cousins. In 2020, if I went to every general manager, if I went to every fan, and I went to every coach, and I said, rank them. Deshaun Watson, Trubisky, Kirk Cousins. Would the ranking be would there be any person without the last name Cousins not rank it Mahomes, Watson, Cousins, and they'd all be like, I like 1 and 2, third. Like you might meet some people like Kyle that like Cousins. I think there'd be a lot of people like,
it's
yeah,
a good
what
question.
do you want,
Would it be? It's hard to get 100%, right? Anytime like Mike Sando puts together a survey, there's never 100% of anything. But that one would have to be 100% of the ballots have Cousins third.
And when you take a pass rusher really high, just because it's not a quarterback, I'd say it's the number 2 thing beside a quarterback, that just the pressure on that guy to be a really impactful player. Because we have so many examples just in recent memory of guys going. The Niners have a recent example less than a decade ago when they took Aldon Smith, and it was just like, Jesus, and then last year you see Bosa. Like, that's the high end. But even if you get like what Dee Ford became for the Chiefs, now they ended up trading him when they franchised him, but he became good enough where they picked up his 5th-year option. It was clear he's an NFL talent. It was like, okay, Solomon Thomas, and this is not personal, is the worst case scenario guy. Like, it's just, he's not good. And they took him 3rd overall. He's just not good. And he'd have his option decline whether he was the number 1 overall pick. He'd have the option decline if he was the 32nd pick in the draft. He's not a good player.
And you hated the pick when it happened for some pretty basic reasons, right?
Well, how do tweeners play? Like in the NBA, you're not a 4, you're not a 3. There's never been a better time to not really have a position, right? If you're long or whatever.
You do have to be athletically superior. You do have to be an athletic to be that type of player. You have to be athletically, even though you're not tall, superior, athletically superior.
But I think Solomon physically has, like, he's 6'3", but what's his true weight? Is he a 250 guy? Is he a 280 guy? He's not fast enough to be a pass rusher like Bosa or Ford. He's not powerful or dynamic enough to be like Armstead or Buckner. And you could say, well, John, all those guys are really good. I'd say true. This guy was drafted 3rd overall. So, fuck. And it's just those guys, the Niners have had a unique situation because last year they started at one point in time 4 first-rounders. That's what they look like. And they were all, Bosa hit the ground running. Armstead took a while. Ford was kind of up and down. Buckner was just Mr. Consistent. So you had like every one of their stories was different, but they all look like starters and good players. And he not even in their world. This was, I honestly think, guy of all beside Taco Charlton that already got traded and cut is like going to be out of the league. I think Solomon Thomas might have been the easiest no-brainer 5th-year option decline of like the group. The quit where you don't even think about it. The guys who were on the
same team that's. I mean, John Ross was easier, John.
Or at worst, it's just as easy. You could argue, hey, let's just take a deep breath. Let's see him with Burrow. What if he does bounce back? We did invest some time.
Didn't they talk about moving him to DB in his first year, allegedly?
Yeah, but it changed. I mean, he had a couple moments. Like Solomon's never had a moment, guy.
No, but
had a couple
he's
run
been.
stops.
All right, what round would they have had to draft him in for you to go, oh, solid player for the 49ers, and not even think if he was? You wouldn't say that if he was a 2nd rounder, would you?
I was gonna start at 5th.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I think if he was
mid fourth, I'd be fine. Yeah,
3rd feels a little like Akello Weatherspoon's done some good things for them, but in the 3rd round, you're hoping he's your starting corner permanently.
But he was for a little while. And he functioned.
Yeah.
The guy, there was a freak out on social media, but I think it's a polarizing discussion when the Niners took a punter the kid from Utah, the Australian, in the fourth
Those
round.
people were
And
wrong
people
to
were
freak
like,
out, as we told people at the time.
but I think it's fair to have a discussion. Should you take a punter or kicker? Like, it was just a basic conversation that, well, if the guy is your starting punter for the next 7-8 years, yes, on the third day. Where I think if I told you you got your starting kicker for the next decade in the second round, do you like that as much?
No.
Because most good pass rushers come when you just look around the league. Aaron Donald, Khalil Mack, the Watts, Aldens, DeMarcus Lawrence was a second-round pick, but it was character. Like most good players, Fletcher Cox, right? They just come high. Clowney. They're just, you're not like, I got this Khalil Mack type in the third. Like, it's just, that's usually rare. So we like the mindset of taking guys high, like a Kinlaw, like Bosa. It's just when you miss, this is the worst type miss. I guess it could be worse. Like the Reuben thing had a character element to it.
Well, they're just different, right? Solomon was a misevaluation of the talent of the player.
Yeah.
Reuben was a calculated risk that didn't work. Those are two different things. I think they knew that Reuben was a risk. Everyone did. That's why he was available when they moved back up to get him in the 20s. But they thought, hey, we can create an environment here for him. We can make this work. Again, his injuries were part of the issue. It wasn't just the off-field stuff, right? Injuries were part of the factor, which that was also a reason. There were people that were not drafting him not because of his off-field concerns, but because of his injury, because of his shoulder, right? That was part of the reason people were passing.
I think they were interwoven kind of hand in hand.
He had
I think
a
his
double
off-the-field concerns.
Double red flag.
Yeah. He got sent home from the
double
combine.
flagger, John. Not many double flaggers out there.
But at least you could say they took a risk, and teams do this. He was an NFL player. And if he just would have stayed healthy and not, he had one of the most egregious errors in NFL history. He got arrested at a team hotel during the season. You stay in the NFL, especially on a cross-country trip, if you're going west to east, you're there for less probably at the hotel than 12 hours. You were there for such a small amount. He did not make it till the morning and was taken out in handcuffs and was cut the next morning. And that was a very, very embarrassing moment, though he was kind of validated. She made it up, whatever.
But part of it was the Niners were coming, the previous regime had dealt with Aldon Smith. There was all this stuff.
It was irrelevant. And then you kind of feel bad for the kid, right? He goes to Washington. Remember the first rep of the first OTA, his leg gets caught and snapped. And the Washington Redskins, remember Jay Gruden was like, we had to stop practice. This shit can't be happening again. What? This is crazy. And you start realizing maybe God doesn't like the Redskins. But at least Reuben, in fairness to John and the process, he was a talent. Solomon is one of those where I think you feel better 3 years later. You go, well, they've actually been pretty, good with their moves, right? Bosa, they stuck it through with Armstead. He became one. Buckner became a really good player on their watch. The D Ford calculated risk also, but at least no one says, well, D Ford's issue is just on the field. When he's on the, health, when he's on the field, he's one of the quickest pass rushers. Some would say he's the fastest pass rusher in the league. He just gets hurt a lot.
Yeah, and I think
they would die for Solomon Thomas. Wouldn't they die to be Solomon can play, he just can't stay on the field. They would die to have that be the conversation.
And part of the Reuben pick was we felt like we got a rock-solid first pick in the first round, so we can kind of take a risk on our second guy, even though the irony is the second guy, if we just talked about talent, was viewed as a better talent, had better production, all that in college. Well, I guess they play different positions. But so I think on the whole you'd go, but you can't call a draft in which you got the face of your franchise a failure. You could call the first round a failure. But I thought what's interesting about the first round is the maneuvering was very similar to this round.
What letter grade would you give this thing, though? Kittle inflates it.
Well, yeah, Kittle. But to me, how? Kittle. They got Kittle. Because to me, you can do you got Kittle if you had only gotten someone else in the first round. It's but if I play the only gotten someone else in the first round, then we got to play the what if I didn't get Kittle in the fifth round game. You can't play that game.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I got no problem not giving it a C-, but I can't give it.
You can't give it
probably anything higher than a B. But if you do take a step back, you're well, you got George fucking Kittle, and you just went to the Super Bowl, and he's your best player. So you're right. It's not as shitty because he swings the pendulum for his big. It's impossible. The only way you can have a bigger disaster in the first round were if they would have had 3 picks. They had 2 first-round picks. And they whiffed on them both.
So here's what's important then, given what you just said. And this is, I think, kind of why we.
And Akel's not even a starter anymore. Beathard's the
DJ
third
Jones
stringer. Joe Williams is out of the
Trent
league.
might come back. But here's the thing, and this is like when we were talking about doing this video, one thing you said was, I think what's important here is how they have responded since this first round. And so I think part of this draft is, at the time it got viewed like good maneuvering guys. In retrospect, obviously it gets viewed like a bad first round. Part of the reason we can look at it and say, you nailed the George Kittle and that elevates the whole thing, is because we've seen them do good things in the first round since. Right? If you only had this draft and said, is this a good GM or a bad GM? You'd say, well, the Kittle getting Hall of Famers, we think, Pro Bowlers, faces of the franchise in the 5th round, that's not a recipe you can live off of. The recipe you have to live off of is nailing first round picks. And this draft, they did not do that. So if you just gave it to like some doctor draft, you said, what do you think of this draft? He'd go, this is not the resume of future success here. But as it turned out, this first round, we think, we haven't had 10 drafts yet, John, so this thing is still evolving. But as it turned out, this team has drafted well in the first round since. And this outlier maybe is just an outlier.
Because I think if you gave it to a doctor or an economist, they'd go, well, you hit on a penny stock, a 5th, 6th, 7th round pick. Listen, we can talk the Bradys and the Shermans, but the level of luck involved in getting a player of that caliber that late is slim to none. The problem is you bet on two where you have, quote unquote, higher percentage of sure things, and I'd say the Reuben Foster one is not close to as bad as Solomon Thomas, because they ended up getting him at 31. The Solomon Thomas, there's a chance that's the worst pick they ever make, right?
I hope so.
He lasted 4 years. They took him at 3rd overall.
I mean, look, in your penny stock analogy, you made enough money off Kittle to cover the losses of Thomas and Foster, but that's assuming you weren't part of that. It's not if they had taken a different if they had taken Mitchell Trubisky, I think it'd be a lot harder to swallow. If they were in the quarterback draft market, like they traded back from 2 because like we're just not taking any of these quarterbacks. Okay, wrong, but fine. But if they had taken Trubisky, it would be a lot harder to stomach. Like right now, as bad as that is, John, you said earlier, like, is this the worst one? I don't know. Trubisky's been a better player than Solomon Thomas, but at least his comps aren't the two guys that were taken after.
The difference also
Watson.
Between, you'd argue, any position beside quarterback is for 3 years, Mitch has been their quarterback. And then going into his 4th year, they had to give up a 4th round pick and pay Nick Foles. They had to keep doubling down. Where in football, you just rotate him with other defensive line, and then he just kind of becomes irrelevant. So it's like same with receivers, same with DBs. If the guy can just kind of play in, he still functions, but he doesn't screw you. A quarterback, you're right, is a set your franchise back so far because it's only the one guy playing. It's why, to the kicker and punter analogy with the Aguayo, when you do that, there's not like 3 kickers on your team. So you're like, oh, whatever, he's just part of the group. You got to
nail that one.
You know, like, because I think they would tell you, listen, is Solomon Thomas good? No, but we like him. He plays for us. He dresses for a Super Bowl team. He's not like a non-NFL player, and it's not that big a deal. Trubisky was probably the most polarizing player in the NFL in the 2019 fall, right? It's like he was the 2nd overall pick. So quarterbacks just held to a higher standard. And I think what's easier to stomach about Solomon Thomas is there weren't like 2 defensive linemen after him that were like Myles Garrett went above him, and then like 2 Myles Garretts went after him. It was like, well, it was kind of a weird draft. And to me, you just kind of kick yourself. You could have taken his teammate, but it would have been a crazy pick at the time.
Yeah, but you also could have taken one of the other guys, one of the 13 other guys that had their 5th-year option decline in this draft.
Yeah.
You know?
But I think it's a good example just in drafts, and we all think that, and we just had one recently, I think around 40%, we say 50% of the players are bust. Well, yeah, I think you figure that out by like year 6 or 7 because you kind of hold out hope. But by going into year 4, year 4, 40% of them didn't work out. Think about that. Now, it doesn't mean they might not have an 8-9 year career. It just means that team would immediately do over that pick.
That's in line with Ron
which
Wolf
is not
saying
good.
It's basically 50-50, these picks. Crazy thought.
And that's the first round, right? The numbers decline as you get through the rounds.
Yeah.
Because like what percent of 4th-round picks are on your team 3 years later, right? It's tiny.
So, crazy thought, which we haven't talked about before, but it just occurred to me. Would the Niners, let me just play devil's advocate here for a second, because it sounds crazy, I know. Would they be in better shape if they had used the pick on Christian McCaffrey and then were just now in a position to pay Christian McCaffrey a bunch of money? Like, given how good Kyle Shanahan is with just running back. Like, didn't you tell me, wasn't Matt Breida a free agent, undrafted free agent 2017?
Yeah, in this group. But, guy, they'd have a team.
I understand. They'd have.
It's hard to play the game.
We're talking about a future. Okay,
they'd
so
have fucking George
off.
Kittle. They'd have Christian McCaffrey. They'd have Deebo Samuel. I mean, again, it's hard that you just – would they have won an extra game with Christian?
I'm
You're
just
right.
asking, should Kyle Shanahan's 49ers be spending a lot of money at running back?
Yes.
If the running back is that guy.
Now, if you told me this, would you rather have – for them, the way it all played out, would you rather on this team have Jamal Adams or Christian McCaffrey? We could have an argument. I just always lean, I'll take the best player possible with my elite coach. Because what are you doing? Oh, who's in your backfield? Oh, Christian McCaffrey. There's George Kittle. There's Deebo. There's Ayuk. There's Trent Williams. Let's roll. So even if our defense gives up 5 more points than they did last year, we're going to score more. I'll promise your ass that.
I got to
think how good he'd be with Kyle Shanahan.
I got to ask David Shaw next time I talk to him, because he was always adamant that Christian McCaffrey was going to be a star before he was drafted, and people don't get it, and this is crazy. I wonder if he and John Lynch talked about Solomon or Christian, like as a comp, who he would have drafted.
I think if you have an organizational philosophy, because I think the Niners do, they would not take a guy that high.
No, I'm saying I wonder if David Shaw would have, if we could have said, David, what do you recommend? Which one of your players should we take first?
Yeah, it's like when the Portland Trail Blazers said, we don't need a shooting guard, and Bobby Knight says, play Michael at center. Did he go, start him off at wide receiver? It doesn't matter. Get him on your team. Because he was right about Christian, who I thought was going to be Julian Edelman. Well, it turns out he can turn into Julian Edelman with a little bit of like LT. So it's like he can do it all. That's where I think he got undervalued. But you got to give I think the craziest pick of the top 10 before those 2 quarterbacks came, and even Deshaun wasn't as crazy as Mahomes, when Christian McCaffrey went 8, like when Solomon Thomas went 3, that wasn't that weird, right? People thought Solomon Thomas was going to go really high.
Trubisky going that high wasn't that crazy.
No, don't you think McCaffrey going 8 was one of the bigger wow moments?
I'm with you. That was viewed as the biggest wow moment of the top 9. And even after that draft, it was viewed as one of the crazier picks of the draft.
I think him and Mahomes were like, whoa, they did that. They took him 8 and they traded for Mahomes. Because even Watson was like, oh, Watson was good. The Texans needed a quarterback. It really, the Watson wasn't that weird. The reason that got weird, and this is where where the Niners get a little bit of a pass. If you would have traded up for Solomon Thomas, it's even worse. Like the part of the Bears, they gave up a 2nd and a 3rd round pick to get him. The Browns, why they still get a lot of shit to this day, they traded out. Not just of Watson, they also could have had Mahomes. So it's like, and the previous year they had said they didn't believe that a guy named Carson New Dad Wentz was a top 20 NFL quarterback. So it's not like, the good thing about John Lynch, didn't drop any like, yeah, we don't think McCaffrey's that good. Right. Or, we don't believe in Mahomes. They're just like, honestly, we didn't watch enough, which is not ideal. But I'd rather say I didn't watch enough than I think the guy sucks.
Agreed. On that note, let us know what you think down in the comments.